I'm Heather, and this is a Living with Addiction podcast, where I show you how you have more power than you realize when it comes to helping yourself and your child that's struggling with addiction. Hello, hello. How we doing today? So I'm really excited to share a new tool with you today because this tool has totally changed my life. And I share a lot of the results that I've created with it and a lot of things I've learned because of it. But today I'm going to share with you how I figured it all out. Until I learned about this tool, I always gave my power away to things outside of me. And whenever we think anything outside of us is in control, then we're just totally powerless. Like with my daughter's addiction, her and her addiction had all the power. I was stuck trying to control her and trying to get her sober because I believed that was the only way I could get some relief from the pain that I was in. And this is why we end up totally overwhelmed, not just by our kids' addiction, but by so many circumstances in our life. And we're conditioned to think this way. We're told from an early age that other people hurt our feelings and they are responsible for how we feel about the things that they do. The way we have been taught is totally wrong. It's really an injustice that we're taught that we're so powerless, that we can never be fully satisfied unless people, places, and things provide the relief that we seek by behaving right. So, as you're listening to the rest of this podcast, and as you go about the rest of your day or the rest of your week, I just want to challenge you to think about how this plays out in your life. I want you to see all the ways that you want other people to change so that you can feel better. And this was a major problem for me when I was trying to find relief from my daughter's addiction because she didn't want to be sober. And I needed her to be sober so that everything could be okay again. And as I endlessly Googled, how do I help my daughter with her addiction? Everything I found was focused on what to do if my daughter wanted to be sober, and she didn't want to be sober. Nothing I found said, this is what you do if they don't want to be sober. Until I found this tool called the self-coaching model that I want to share with you today. The self-coaching model is the tool that I use to get to my after. And I've talked a little bit about the before and after process of myself and my clients in episode 5 and 6. So if you haven't listened to those episodes, I recommend you go back and listen to them when you're done listening to this one so you can hear about that before and after process and the changes that happened in my life and the changes I see with my clients. But the self-coaching model is what transformed me from a person who was stuck and powerless to a person who could move forward in a very intentional way because I could see my power and choice and what I could control in every situation. Before that, my daughter's addiction was running my life, and I was completely dependent on her to change so I could feel better. But after I started using the self-coaching model, I had the confidence that I could depend on myself to handle any situation. And I knew that 100% of my peace of mind and happiness depended on me, and that my daughter did not have to change for me to be okay. It's not that I didn't want her to change anymore. I still wanted her to change. I wanted her to be happy and healthy and not to have to go through all of the things that we see our kids go through with addiction. But the difference was I no longer needed her to change. I wasn't desperately trying to force or control the situation anymore. And if your mind is wandering, what I'm telling you right now is life-changing. So tune back in because you don't want to miss this. I am amazed by how fast the coaching model works and how quickly results change when you're using the self-coaching model for yourself. When I teach it to my clients and they start practicing doing models and thinking in models, I see them change very quickly, especially when they start using it on all areas of their life, like not just looking at their kids' addiction, but looking at themselves and really using it to change how they think about life. It's really a gift for me to get to see people making those changes in their life. And all the concepts that I teach come from the model. In every episode of this podcast, all of my blogs, all my social media posts, everything comes from what I have learned about life and my daughter's addiction by doing models. They've literally changed how I think. Like, have you ever had an experience in life that just forever changed how you looked at the world? Well, when I learned the model, the way that I looked at the world totally changed because I could immediately see why I had struggled so much in life before that, why things never made sense before, and why I often created the opposite of what I wanted. And that everything that I wanted was available to me, and it was all of the answers were inside of me, and I didn't have to look outside of me anymore for anybody to change for me to be okay. And that's the biggest part. I wrote out models every day for years, and I started thinking in models, and it was like the light started coming on in my life. So let me share the concept with you and how it works now. The model has 5 components. And the first component is circumstances. And circumstances are things in the world that we can't control. They are like our past, other people's behavior, events in the world, the weather, and of course, our child's addiction. Think about them as facts that could be proven in a court of law, like everybody would agree. When we try to control our circumstances, we waste so much energy. The good news, though, is that we can control all of the other parts of the model. And this is where things, where I always looked at things wrong before. I was always trying to change the circumstance instead of knowing that I could change these other 5 components. So the second component is thoughts. Circumstances trigger thoughts. And thoughts are just sentences in our brain. We have about 60,000 sentences in our brain every day. And we need to be aware of those thoughts and evaluate them. The thoughts that we choose to think about our circumstances cause our feelings. So when you have a thought about your circumstances, it releases a chemical in your brain and you feel the sensation of an emotion in your body. So if you've been listening to my podcast, you've heard me say that thoughts create feelings and thoughts also create your reality. And that's why I'm always emphasizing how critical it is to be very conscious about what you're thinking. In episode 14, I shared how some thoughts I was having about my breast cancer diagnosis were debilitating and how I changed those thoughts intentionally. And I could not have done that without the model. So if you haven't listened yet, it's a really powerful episode. So I'd go back and listen to it, and you'll see how the model helped me change my thoughts about my diagnosis. And something really important I want to mention here is that one of the hardest things with models is differentiating circumstances from thoughts because most people believe that their thoughts are facts, but they're not. It's actually very freeing to start to see your thoughts as not always true and not always facts. So when you say someone is mean to you, That's a thought. Now, the exact words that they said, not the interpretation of their words, but the exact words they said, that's a circumstance. That's a fact. Everything else is a thought about what they said. So, thoughts create our feeling, and we physically feel it in our body. So, feelings are the third part of the model. The first part was circumstance, the second part was thoughts, the third part is feelings. And feelings drive all of our actions. Think about feelings as fuel for actions. So you have a circumstance in your life, you have a thought about it, and the thought creates a feeling in your body. Here's what's super important about feelings: we're always moving toward how we want to feel or away from how we don't want to feel. Every single thing we do in our life is because how we think it will make us feel. And every single thing we don't do in our life is because how we think it will make us feel. If we aren't intentional with that, we're running from our feelings and we're at the effect of them. So, the fourth part of the model is actions. And based on our feelings, we either take action, react, or take no action at all. Think about how you act when you feel compassion versus how you act when you feel judgment. It's a major difference between actions taken from compassion versus actions taken from judgment. They're going to create two very different results. And results are the fifth component of the model. They're the impact your actions have on your life. So, examining all four parts of the model leading up to the results gives you the opportunity to create the results that you want in your life. And results are always a reflection of what you're thinking because your thoughts create your results. And they drive every part of the model that leads to your results. So once you understand how this works, the beauty of it is you can create any result you want for yourself. The model doesn't work to control other people. It just empowers you to create what you want for your life. So, in summary, I just want to go over it one more time. Circumstances are facts of your life. Stay away from emotional words and descriptions here, just the facts. Thoughts are one sentence about the circumstance. Feelings like sad, angry, excited are created by thoughts. You choose one feeling that is created by the thought you're thinking about the circumstance. And then we take actions from our feelings, and the actions that we take create results. So write this down on a piece of paper. Circumstance equals fact. Thought equals one sentence you think about the circumstance. Feeling equals one word you are feeling based on the thought. Action is what you do when you feel that feeling. Result is the impact of your actions. When we try to control circumstances, we waste a lot of energy and give all of our power away. It makes us totally ineffective. Our kids and their addiction are a circumstance. Trying to control our kids and their addiction is trying to control the circumstance. It's totally ineffective. Thoughts. That is where all your control is. You have control of how you think about all the circumstances of your child's addiction. Every podcast I've done has some example of optional thoughts you can think about your child's addiction. And if your thought is that your child's addiction is tragic, that's the result you're going to create because you will see everything that happens through that lens of it being tragic. So let me walk you through a model, and this is like an example of something that I experienced. And the circumstance was that my daughter relapsed. That's it. Just the fact of what happened. There's no feeling words in there, no drama about it. The circumstance was that my daughter relapsed. My thought was, she's going to go back to the horrible way she used to live. And that thought created the feeling of fear. And the actions that I took from fear were that I envisioned all the horrible, dark, depressing things that could go wrong. I thought that all hope was lost for her sobriety. I judged every single action she took as either moving toward sobriety again or moving toward a life of using, which, by the way, is exhausting, like to monitor and review and categorize every action a human takes. It takes up so much brain power that we can be using on other things. Other actions were judging myself for not being able to help her, judging her for not helping herself, judging her addiction and hating what it does to her, trying to figure out how to get her to stop using. I act needy, creepy, and weird, and she doesn't want to be around me. I cry a lot because everything seems so dismal. And the result that I created with those actions was I went back to the horrible place that I used to live. I remember my original thought was that she's going to go back to the horrible place she used to live. But the result that I created was that I went back to the horrible place that I used to live before I understood the model, before I started taking my power and control back from it, before I found any my own recovery. I went back to the way that I used to live when I was in that model. So, can you see how that result is directly related to my thought? Nobody else can be in your result line. And that's what I love about the model. So, I had this cute story about this harness that I bought for my dog that I think is a great example of how the model works. So, my dog Jarvis, he is the sweetest yellow lab, and he weighs like 95 to 100 pounds, but he gets really excited when I walk him and he pulls me really hard. So I bought this harness that has a hook in the front. So when he tries to run off, instead of pulling my arm and forcing me to run with him, it jerks him around sideways and he loses his momentum. So this harness works like the model in that it makes him responsible for the result he creates instead of putting it on me. So when the circumstance happens that we're on a walk and a squirrel runs in front of us, he thinks, this is Jarvis, my dog, thinking, if I jerk the leash and my mom hard enough, I can get that squirrel. And he feels excited. His action is to lunge forward with 95 pounds of sheer excitement. But the result is the harness flips him around and he gets jerked around. He's the one in the result, not me. His model is all about him. And the model works exactly like the harness I bought Jarvis. It always directs your results back to you. It shows you how you create your results and how you can change them. So now going back to the model that I used as an example about my daughter's relapse, the result I created was suffering for myself, and I gave my power to her addiction. But the beauty of knowing how the model works is that I can write all that down and evaluate it and intentionally create a different result. So here's my intentional model that I created. The circumstance is the same, and that's that my daughter relapsed. That's the fact of what happened. The thought I chose is I'm going to love her through this. The feeling that that thought created was love. And the actions that I took from love were to focus on myself and what I need, to detach from her addiction. I release judgment and replace it with compassion. I look at relapse as a part of the process rather than the end of her sobriety. And I don't respond to the urge to label her relapse as good or bad, which you know how hard that is because we want to label everything as good or bad. I accept the situation instead of resisting it. Remember that I have no idea how it will turn out instead of projecting what will happen. And the result that creates is I show up with love. My unintentional model was full of doom and gloom and fear. It was debilitating. But my intentional model created peace of mind for me that did not depend on her changing. Those are two widely different experiences of the same circumstance. And that is available to you with every circumstance in your life. That's what the model does. It gives you choices in every situation and it helps you create results that serve you. For every circumstance, there are infinite options of thoughts to choose to think about it. So, if you want to try a model out for yourself, then here's how you do it. Well, before I say that, I want to say one other thing is this isn't always about choosing happiness or um, happy thoughts and feelings. This is about having the choice. If you want to choose to be sad about something, then choose to be sad about it and own that. But there's a power in knowing that it's a choice and that you get to own it. This is never about just thinking happy thoughts and making things that you think are bad good. This is about being able to step outside of a situation and evaluate it and have choice in how you handle it. So, all right, going back to where I was about the model. If you want to try one for yourself, then here's how you do it. So, get out a piece of paper, ask yourself, what's the problem? Like, what's my pain point? Is it a circumstance, a thought, a feeling, or an action or a result? If the problem you feel is you feel frustrated, then put frustrated in the feeling line. Next, ask yourself why. Like, why am I feeling frustrated? The answer to that question is your thought. Your thought creates the feeling. So, whatever you're feeling, whatever's causing that is a thought. So, you put that in the thought line. What is the thought about? That's the fact that goes in the circumstance line. When I feel this way, which is frustrated, I'm using in this example, what do I do? Well, whatever you do goes in the action line. And then what happens when I take those actions? What do I create? That's the result. Your result will always be evidence of your thoughts. So I suggest writing down the models I gave you earlier in the podcast, the examples of how I reacted to my daughter's relapse and then what I chose to create. So you can look at them as examples where you're trying to figure out how to do these models. The most important thing is to just do them. Like, give up on the idea that there's a right and a wrong way to do them because they'll just keep you from ever getting started. There's no perfect way to do it. And I've actually saved some of my models all the way back to 3 or 4 years ago when I started doing them, and mechanically, they're just a mess. But they were still creating awareness. They were helping me see where I was giving my power away and helping me to see the choices that I had in every situation. They were helping me intentionally rewire my brain and create the results that I wanted in my life, and they weren't perfect. So just go ahead and try them. And one last thing about models that I want to say, and it's really important. It's an important element of making them work for you is you have to be willing to be wrong about things and you have to be willing to adopt some new beliefs. You don't have to believe in it right away. You just have to be willing to try it out and stick with it until it makes sense to you and eventually becomes second nature. Like I said, I do still write models down, but I just have become to the place where I just think in models. I automatically know when I have this thought, this is the result that I'm going to create. I'm going to feel this way and I'm going to act this way and I'm not going to get the result I want. And I can just quickly go through it in my mind. It's second nature to me. So your brain wants to prove itself true. And that's what the model demonstrates. Your brain's always looking for evidence of whatever it's thinking. You'll find that a lot of your actions are based on wanting to believe that your thought is true. Your brain likes to be efficient and it likes to be right. And when you start trying to change your thinking, you're going to have this cognitive dissonance. You're going to have this discomfort of adjusting from believing that your thoughts are true to opening up to the idea that they're not all true and that any thought is available to you for every circumstance. I mean, that's just so freeing. And most people don't like the feeling of that discomfort of, something new. And so they give up on trying to use the model, or they never use it at all and they really miss out. But it's so worth the effort. And I promise you, it's worth that initial discomfort of being in a place where you've proven yourself wrong. Hell, I love proving myself wrong because that means that I can see all of these different options that are available to me. And if you're willing to be wrong, then you're going to be willing to adopt new thoughts, which will ultimately change your entire life because it'll change the way you feel, which changes the way you act, and that'll create different results. So you can literally create whatever you want in your life. So if you want help creating different results in your life, sign up for a call with me using the link that's in the show notes. And that's all I have for you today on the model. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the week, and I'll talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to learn more about my work, go to heatherrosscoaching.com. If you want to help other parents who are struggling with a child's addiction, you can do it two different ways. First, you can share the podcast with them directly, or you can share it on your social media. Second, you can leave a review. Talk to you next week.